Now, normally when we talk about variables of extraction, we think in terms of these flat 9-bar profiles. So all we really think about is we think about grind size, we think about dose, we think about ratio, and we think about temperature. Now, these are the things we typically think about when you have an E61 machine or some sort of flat 9-bar machine that is pumping at a constant flow rate until we hit a specific pressure. The OPV might divert the amount of liquid that we're not using, right? So if it's 10 milliliters a second, it hits 9 bar, then it's going to divert and only use the amount of water it needs to maintain that 9 bar or whatever pressure it's set at. So we don't really have a lot of control in these typical ones. So it's been kind of a very narrow approach to dialing an espresso whenever you have a typical machine. You're only really focusing on what dose am I doing? And most people will find a dose and they sit on it. In fact, I've done multiple polls on my own YouTube, and it seems that the majority of people live in the 18 to 19 dose range. They don't really play around much outside of that. And even if you do, it requires buying new baskets that are deeper or more shallow in order to have the right headspace. Headspace is an important thing. Less headspace on a typical pump machine is likely going to give you a much better body and a just more consistent extraction. So anyway, with dose, normally people have this kind of situated. They don't really play with dose too much. Ratio, people may play a bit where they'll do, oh, I'm doing 18 grams in, 36 out. I might do 38 out next time. It's a very small window they play with, but they do play with ratio a little bit. So we'll put a check by it. People don't mess with dose, people mess with ratio. Temperature, not every machine has a PID controller. In fact, they only began to be installed on home machines in like the mid-2000s. It's a very recent thing that's been added. People still buy machines without PID controllers. It's only now that companies are actually putting them on their base models. Some of them still charge a ton for the PID controller, but that's reality. So temperature for a lot of people is not actually something they're changing. You have like a 90 or 92 thermostat on your machine, and that's what you got to play with. So most people, when they are approaching their machine, they work on their grind size, right? They kind of have a dose they have in mind, let's say 18 grams. They're working with a 1-to-2 ratio, and the temp is set at 92 Celsius, okay? Or, 203 or whatever it might be Fahrenheit. So we have these kind of locked in situations, and the thing that we're messing most with is grind size. So it's actually been pretty simplistic, but very difficult whenever you're dialing in coffee, because all you really need to do is hit your recipe. These flat 9-bar machines were built solely for cafe experiences to quickly make dark roast coffees at a very specific way that pleased the masses. It was to kind of replicate what was happening in cup from these type of lever machines, but automating it. Now, with a flat 9-bar, you do tend to have 9 bar of pressure throughout the entirety of the shot, unless your puck integrity, the resistance, isn't high enough that the highest flow rate can maintain 9 bar. And that's when you have the dipping like we showed on this other graph. So on this graph, a lot of times on a flat 9-bar, people, because they get so scared of the blonding or they get scared of the spraying, they will grind fine enough that it does hit 9 bar the whole time and the output flow stays quite low. But these machines, let's just say 10 mils a second, because that's pretty typical with commercial machines. What happens is, if you begin to lose integrity, the flow rate increases. And it will keep increasing to maintain that 9 bar or 10 bar or whatever it's at. It's only whenever it's maxed out its flow rate that the pressure will begin to dip. And it looks really ugly whenever you've maxed out flow rate. So a lot of times you are just getting 9 bar throughout the whole shot because people will continue to go finer and finer out of fear of what those shots look like, being fooled by the optics. So when we're looking at this, people are just messing around with grind size until they hit their typical ratio and whatnot. And I guess we could add a fifth one with time. So people do, 18 in, 36 out on the ratio, 92 Celsius, 30 seconds. So then they're just playing with grind size until they hit the numbers. But then you have this one style of shot that doesn't work with all the coffees. The reason it worked and took over in cafes is because most of these cafes were using very soluble, very brittle, high fines producing coffees that were also being used with grinders that were not ideal, creating a very bimodal distribution. So they had all of the ingredients for an incredibly densely packed puck, to the point where a flat 9-bar pump was never actually pushing that much water. It was actually much better at replicating these lever machines than we think. Yes, the pressure wasn't really going down as a spring would, but the flow rate wasn't really changing that much throughout it because the resistance although you were losing solubles, wasn't really changing too much because their roast was so dark, the coffees were so brittle, the grinders were producing such crazy grind sizes and particle distributions that it was creating essentially a rock that it was going through. So you're not losing much resistance, right? So that is fine with dark roast, but whenever you get into a world of all these other coffees, you want to experience something outside of this typical understanding of espresso. That's where it gets a bit more complicated, but also more fun and opens up a lot more doors. Now, where the Meticulous comes into play is this offers you essentially an unlimited amount of profiles to play with. We are not just stuck at a ratio of 1:2 with a flat 9-bar profile at a specific fixed debit that is going to be, changing. The input flow rate will change based off your grind size and the resistance threshold. You now have a lot more that you can play with. So let's take a look at these variables and how they're going to affect your cup of coffee.